Hi class, I wanted to do a cookie for you and I didn't have a chance Saturday because I was a little under the weather, but here's my snowman that I drew, and it's nothing incredibly artistic, but I thought it was a lot of fun. And I'm going to show you how to do sprinkles, textures, shadows, light source, and putting color in whites, which is a really big part of this. So let's get started. I went ahead and transferred my drawing. I made my changes that I needed to make, or I wanted to make, and I decided not to mask out any of the colored sprinkles. I only masked out the white sprinkles that were like the discs. But the colored ones are bright enough to carry over the wash that would be around the background. And you can see where I have some practice ones here at the top. So on the very far left, that is Prismacolor. And I went ahead and just washed right over it after I put a good application of Prismacolor, trying to do a resist. The one in the middle, I actually like the best, and that is just plain old watercolor, and I just put a purple shadow underneath them. And the last one on the edge, it was just another practice on the left side of Prismacolor mixed with watercolor. So let's get started. And adjusting my camera a little bit here. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is do a little bit of masking. And I've masked out all of the frosting, or the piped frosting. And the masking fluid almost feels like frosting anyhow. And it's all done now. I'm going to go over the eye a little bit. And wash out my brush. And I'm going to dry this off. The first thing I'm going to start with is the background. And I'm always thinking about temperature, as you know. So temperature in the background, we could compare that temperature to what's going on in the cookie part. So this looks like a really simple assignment, but it really is a challenge in that what we're trying to do is train our eye to see warms and cools. So I see in the background, it's white for sure in my brain, but I really see lavender, blue, that makes kind of a neutral gray. So I'm going to start with purple, Winsor violet, and a bit of cobalt. And that'll give me a good neutral blue-gray. And I'm going to add the complement of purple, which is yellow. So I'm putting a little bit of nickel titanate, which is a neutral, or a cool light yellow, and it'll give me a gray. So it's nickel titanate, a bit of Winsor violet, and a bit of cobalt blue. And I'm just going to go ahead and work around and right over any of the sprinkles, because it really isn't going to matter. There are variations in white. So if I wanted to, and I see a little bit more yellow in one area, or warm, think of it as more warm and cool instead of a color, Just gonna slop some on it. And some other areas may have more the feeling of a blue. So then I'm gonna defer to the cobalt. That variation will give it interest. If it's all the same everywhere, it's just going to be boring. Another area, you could also add permanent rose or any of the warms, like a quinacridone, into that same mixture, and they would work really well. I'm using a number 8 brush. And this little painting is 5 by 7. So I intend to make a card with it, though it doesn't have to be this small. And a little wet under wet work. Remember, it's going to dry lighter. And maybe I'll throw a tiny bit more of the nickel titanate yellow. Lemon would work fine too. And it's finished. I'm going to go ahead and dry this, and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm now ready to get started. And I'm going to be working right to left, which is my usual way of working because of my left-handedness. And I'm going to first remember where is my shadow coming from. And I honestly have to study the photographs. So I'm going to go to the white, and I look at the frosting on the white, and it seems like, and it's really hard to see, but it seems a little bit darker on the far right side. So the light must be coming from this direction. The highlight is right here. So if the highlight's there, maybe it's a little bit lower. So I think that's where my light source is coming from. So I'm going to continue with that light source or that direction and look at the cast shadows as well. So they're coming from the same direction. So you could start with the background, which I will start with a little bit of the background, and then I'll work on to the cookie. I'm changing my brush size to a smaller brush, not much smaller, and this is a number 6. And I'm using Winsor Red. Looking at my photograph and study it a little bit where the red should be. If there's a highlight on something, you have to let it be lighter. Try to do it with not a lot of brush work. This should be simple. And that's about it. I'll let that set up for a while, and I'll do the rest on my own. In the meantime, I'm going to get the green, and the green I'm using is a cool Winsor green. It's transparent. then there is my tree there. Try to be aware that even in shallow space, which this photograph is, it's a shallow space image, there's still things that are higher and lower, and that'll give you the sense of an illusion of reality. So the things that are on top right now would be the red buttons that I'm pointing at, and the cookie, and the green. And then this is all back farther. So you want to have this more blurry than the top part. So not as much emphasis on the background. I'm going to highlight the green a little bit more. And the green appears to be darker. The tree. And I think that just about will do it. Okay, I'm going to dry that, and then I'm going to go ahead and throw in some cast shadows. Be right back. Before I put the cast shadows on the candy, I'm going to go ahead and think of the shadow that's surrounding the cookie. And I'm going to go ahead and take Winsor Violet, Cobalt Blue, just a little bit more concentrated than I used before, and just a tiny bit of yellow. And that gives you a really beautiful gray, and you can see it up here. And I'm using my smaller brush. The shadow's going right over the candy in this area. Being aware of my light source. And I'm going to soften the edge with a little bit of clear water, because it looks like the shadow diffuses a little bit. So it's darker toward the cookie or toward your subject, and it diffuses as it goes out. I'm going to do also the shadow on the hand. And the same thing, just soften up the edge and darker toward the subject. Darkening it up a little bit more here. Looking good. And I'll let it stay. Taking that same color for the shadow. And I hope I'm not blocking your view with my hand. And I'll put a cast shadow on the edge of the candy. Study your photograph. And there's some shadow on the top of the green on the tree. And you could adjust your shadows a little bit more. There's a cast shadow here. So the shadow of this shadow really needs to be about the same value as what you see on the cookie, or a cast from the cookie, because they're so close together. So I think that's looking pretty good. I probably would darken the shadows a little bit more in some places. And it's the same method, same 3 colors, so it's really a limited palette. And I'm also going to put a little bit of shadow around these white buttons that I put some masking fluid on. And I'll let that dry. I'll go ahead and dry the head a little bit. It's really important that the cookie area is dry along the edge where the shadow is, because I don't want the brown to bleed. And I'm softening up the edge a tiny bit. Okay, I'm ready to do the head. So I'm going to clean off some space on my palette. And I think I'll be sticking with my number 6 brush. I'm looking into the color to find out what is going to give me that gingery color. And there's a little bit of red in it, but mostly burnt sienna. And it also looks like it's cooler. It's got some cool in it. And I'm going to go ahead and guess on the Winsor Violet. And I think that just about does it. So Winsor Violet will be the cool portion of the color, and burnt sienna is the warm. And there also looks like there might be some yellow ochre, so I'm going to set some of that up on the side. Okay, so let's get started on our... I forgot to mask out his dimple, that little spot, so I'll have to work around it. Concentrate the color a little bit more. Oh, I did. I can't see the resist on it, but I could see it now. I like to work in areas, so here's a perfect break along the head. So I'll do the head only right now. And since it's cookie, it's gonna not be perfect. Add a little yellow ochre in there now to make some variation and changes. A little slop over. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And if I see any more warm in it, which I kind of see a little bit more of a mahogany color, I could use brown matter. And I want this to be nice and bright and cheery. Yeah, the brown matter always works, doesn't it? That's really pretty. So let's go ahead and dry this guy up. Okay, I'm back, and I think it dried too dull. So I'm going to kind of jazz it up a little bit more by giving it another application of burnt sienna. Remember that burnt sienna is a transparent floating, not a transparent, it's an opaque floating color. So it really is going to sit on the surface more than most colors. So you want to work fast. And try not to lift off the color by overworking. And a little bit of the mahogany color, which is the brown matter. And I'm really going to work on the edge a little here too, give it a little shadow. You can see how the color starts moving and creating puddles. So you have to be careful that the color doesn't pool up. So I'm going to set that up a little bit and add a little violet to create the shadow. I'm putting it on the shadow side. So right now it is mixed in the mud of my blue that I had on the palette. A little bit darker. Cobalt blue and violet. And I'm going to throw a little bit of brown in it. Is a wet into wet shadow. So I want it to bleed into the this side of the cookie color. Remember, it's going to dry lighter. I want it to be bright and have texture like dough, baked dough. Shadow around the eye, because what's cast are the raised buttons here, or the frosting. Even that this is not the subject matter you would normally be painting, and it's not kind of the end of the world subject matter that you'd see in an art show, but it's lots of fun, and you still could learn from these little tiny experiments like this. I'm going to wipe my brush a little bit and soften up that edge, which I didn't like too much, and dry it. Okay, I think I'd like to give it a little bit more pizzazz in the color. How can I do that? I think I'm going to try, I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, quinacridone gold. And I'm mixing it into some burnt sienna. And I'm using a kind of a dry brush, trying not to lift off what's underneath it. And now I'm creating texture of the cookie or the dough using the side of my brush. You don't want to have too much variation of it, but and you probably could get a quinacridone brown. I just don't have one. But it's such a powerful color. And I think that did it. I'm going to dry it one more time. Hang in there. Okay, I am going to add a little bit more dark to my shadow. And it's the same sequence. I'm using brown and all the colors that I've used before, just to darken this up a little bit more. Give myself a nice shadow color, and now I'm going to take that color and move it around the eye. I don't judge it very well sometimes, and I go too light. And a little bit of shadow around the frosting. And around the dimple. And this is a situation where I've moved the pigment around.
Your Pandora Premium session has ended, but all your playlist songs and albums will be waiting for you when you return. Search and play music on demand to access another session.
Okay, here we go. Filling in that pigment movement that I had. You can see how the pigment is pushing over. So I'm going to bring it back. But you could leave it alone too. Okay, I'm going to let that dry and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back, and I'm going to go ahead and take off the masking fluid. When your eraser gets blobbed up like this, sometimes you could take scissors and cut off the eraser crud that builds up on it. And now the frosting. And the dimple. And again, the white specks that were the only place that I masked off before. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit more shadow under the specks on the outside, on the candy. I'm making that same gray combination, which is yellow, blue, and violet. Sometimes you get cross shadows, but I wouldn't worry about it for this. And this particular shadow is a little darker around Gingerbread Man's head. And softer as it goes up. Okay, I'm happy with that shadow. And I'm gonna maybe increase the green. And again, this is Windsor green. Great color to have on your palette. And then there's a little bit of color around the white dots, a shadow color. They're like little white candies. You could use a smaller brush if you choose to. I just think it makes it look nitpicky if you get too tiny. Finished. Okay, now the shadow around the eyes and the frosting. There's a little shadow along this side. Taking the same color. It's really fun doing something not serious. And I'm enjoying this process because it's kind of a fun holiday project. And softening up the edge a little bit. So really it's mainly a gray with a little highlight of white in it. Drop a little water in it. And something that I always kind of think helps is to take some yellow. And if you have white, yellow will usually make it look whiter, especially in a purple background or a dark background. So it gives them more dimension. And when that dries, then I can perk up the shadows just a little bit. So let me dry it and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now the final shadows around the outside of the frosting. And this time I'm using a small brush. Going back to my reference photo for information. And that's pretty good. I think I've got more dimension on that. And the eyes really do feel like they're popping forward. There's a little gray along the side of the frosting on the mouth. And I kind of like it better that way. So the last thing I'm going to show you is to do some of the texture in the gingerbread. I might give him a little eyeball. I think it looks a little bit, maybe a little flat. I'm not sure. I might give him a little bit of a, I think that might help. Okay, this is impromptu. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but I'm going to put a little dark spot in the center, and I'm going to try using violet, blue, and some burnt sienna. Let's mix those three up and see what happens. Maybe more blue. I like it better. It's got lots of personality, and I think that's a lot. Okay, so now I'm going to take a little bit bigger brush, and that'll be my this is number 6, and I'm going to get some texture inside the gingerbread. You could try splattering if you wanted to. And I think I'm just going to use dry brush. You could use your brush in a vertical position. Just make sure it doesn't have like little curls. And cookie patterns are not predictable. And it also carries over into the shadows. And I'll finish the rest of this on my own, and we'll show you the final result when it's all done. I hope you enjoyed the demonstration. Bye-bye, and have a good holiday.